Love that there's a stain on my shirt. Great. It is officially May 1st, which means it's time to talk about all the books that I read in the month of April. I feel like I had such a good reading month in April. I read a lot more books than I originally anticipated I was going to read, which surprised me, but I feel like April was such a good reading month. I'm really excited to share all the books that I read with you guys. Let's start with Once a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. This is a fantasy book that's written in like a fairy tale format. The main character in this book is basically trying to stop the love of her life from marrying another person. She believes that he is under a curse that has made him forget their love. So in her desperation, she makes a deal with the Prince of Hearts. In this book, you really aren't supposed to make deals with immortals because they always have their own motivation for striking that deal with you in the first place. And that's exactly what happens with the Prince of Hearts. It's clear from the very beginning that he has his own reasons for striking a deal with the main character. And as the story progresses, the main character is trying to figure out what his motives are, if he can be trusted, if he can't be trusted, and she keeps getting herself into these situations. It honestly reminds me a lot of Cinderella. I don't know if that's what the author was trying to do with this book, but honestly, I just got a lot of Cinderella vibes, which I'm not mad at. Really enjoyed this book. I honestly feel like I should have read the Caraval series first because I think this is a spin-off series to the Caraval series, and I feel like I would have enjoyed it a lot more had I read that series first, because I think that the Prince of Hearts character is introduced in that series and you get to know him a little bit better. I am going to continue the series, and I do recommend this book if you're into like fairy tale fantasy vibes. It was really cute, really magical. I had a good time reading it. I gave this book a 3.5 out of 5 stars. It wasn't my favorite fantasy book, but I feel like it was a good first book to start a series. I read another fantasy book in April, and it was Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. This book was chilling on my TBR pile for months, so I'm so happy that I finally read it in April. This one basically follows 6 characters. They are all part of a crew that robs and blackmails people, and the leader of the group, or I should say the mastermind of the group, is Cass. Cass is basically approached by a government official to conduct this super dangerous heist, and he offers him and his crew a lot of money. Cass doesn't really care about the whole saving the world objective. He only cares about the money that he'll receive if he successfully completes this heist. This book was definitely a lot harder for me to get into. It was very slow. It had a lot of build up towards the beginning. There were a lot of characters in this book, so I was confused as to who was who and what their part in the story was going to be. By the time I got to the 200-page mark, I had a better understanding of who the characters were, and it definitely picked up a little bit more. I really like that we got to see like the characters past, how they ended up being in this crew. The ending definitely took me by complete surprise. I did not expect that ending at all. I did not see it coming. It did end on a cliffhanger as well, so I'm really excited to read the next book in the series. I think there's only 2 books. I guess it's like a spin-off to the Shadow and Bone trilogy, which I eventually will end up reading, but overall I think that this book is a very high 3.75 out of 5 stars. Definitely recommend. Just know that it starts off very slow before it eventually picks up. I was clearly on a fantasy reading kick in April because the next book that I read is another fantasy book, and that was Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. This is the first book in the Throne of Glass series. This book basically follows a main character who is a imprisoned assassin. She gets summoned to the king's castle. She is basically given the opportunity to win back her freedom if she is able to defeat 23 other assassins, thieves, and warriors. If she defeats all of them, she gains back her freedom and she'll become the king's champion. Basically, from what I've gathered, the king's champion is basically the person who does all of the king's dirty work and like kills people for him. Of course, the main character agrees to this competition because it's her one chance at earning back her freedom. But as the competition begins, her competitors actually start being killed off. So she's trying to figure out who's doing the killing, how can she prevent herself from being killed. This is my second fantasy series by Sarah J. Maas. The first series that I read from her was the ACOTAR series, which I absolutely loved, and I haven't been able to find a fantasy series that I love as much as I loved A Court of Thorns and Roses. Like, that series is just perfection for me, so I'm really hoping that I enjoy Throne of Glass just as much as ACOTAR. We shall see. The verdict is still out on that one. I was reading a lot of Goodreads reviews, and I guess a lot of people didn't like the main character. They found her annoying. They couldn't really believe that she was a true assassin. I personally personally didn't have that problem. I actually enjoyed her character. I really enjoyed her banter with all the other side characters. I enjoyed the writing. The ending was not what I expected. I expected the main character to end up with a certain side character, and when that didn't happen, I was a little disappointed, but I still have hope that they'll end up together in the other books in the series. Fingers crossed. Overall, I give this book like a 3 out of 5 stars. I think it's a solid start to a series. Just know that similar to the Six of Crows series, this book is also very slow at the beginning. It definitely takes a bit to pick up, but I feel like that's the case for every fantasy series. Like the first book tends to be slow because it does all the world building and all the character building in that first book. The next book that I read was Restore Me. So this is the 4th book in the Shatter Me series. I'm not going to dive too much into this book because if you haven't read the Shatter Me series, I don't want to ruin the whole series by telling you guys what this book is about, but just know that this book picks up right where the 3rd one ends off, but it still follows the same characters: Juliet, Warner, Henji, who I love, and this book is meant to set up the next 3 books, I think, in the series. So this one was a lot slower than the 3rd book. The 3rd book I gave 5 stars because I absolutely loved it. This one I gave only a 4 out of 5 star rating because it was a little bit slow. It took a bit to get into and a bit for it to pick up. The main character, Juliet, definitely was a tad bit annoying in this one, but I understand why. The ending took me by complete surprise. I feel like the ending in all of these fantasy books took me by complete surprise this month. This one definitely ended in a huge cliffhanger as well, and I'm really curious to see how Juliet and her friends recover from the ending in this book because I don't really see them moving past everything that happened. I'm really curious to find out what happens next, so best believe that I'll be reading the 5th book in the Shatter Me series in May, and if you haven't checked out this series, what are you doing? Go check it out because it is really good. So I think that's all the fantasy that I read this month. Let's move on to romance. I did read a dark romance this month, which I think this is like my first official dark romance, unless Verity is considered dark romance, but I don't really consider Verity dark romance. Maybe it is, I don't know. But I did read a Colleen Hoover book this month, and I haven't read a Colleen Hoover book in literally months. I think it's been over like 5 months. I don't know when was the last time that I read a Colleen Hoover book, but I decided to finally read Too Late because this is another book that was chilling in my TBR pile for such a long time, and this one basically follows 3 main characters. You actually get each character's point of view, which is one of the reasons why I really enjoy Colleen Hoover's writing, because she normally does dual POVs or multiple POVs, and it just makes the book feel a little bit more authentic. I feel like you really get to know the characters better in that way, and you fly through the books, which I love. Like, I love flying through a book and feeling like I can't put the book down. But it basically follows 3 characters: Sloane, Aza, I still don't know how to pronounce his name, don't like his character, and Carter. Sloane and Aza are in a relationship. Carter kind of enters the picture, I think, 2 years into their relationship, and there's things up between them. This book definitely had the same characteristics of Colleen Hoover's other books. It was very addicting to read, but I will say it wasn't my all-time favorite book from her. I think it's because it is a very dark. It deals with a lot of triggering topics, so before you pick up this book, I definitely suggest to look up the trigger warnings. It is a lot darker than Verity. I knew it was dark going into it, but I just didn't realize how dark it was actually going to be. Like, it gets twisted from the very beginning. Like, from chapter 1, something happens and you're just like, what the hell am I about to read? It's really intense at times, so it's definitely not for people who don't really enjoy dark topics. Overall, I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. There were definitely things that I had issues with within the plot. The plot didn't really seem all that realistic to me, and the book ended at like 250 page mark, something like that, I don't really remember. And then Colleen Hoover continues to write. Like, there's an epilogue to the epilogue, there's a prologue at the very back of the book. I feel like it's just all over the place. I guess Colleen Hoover didn't want to stop writing the book when she wrote the first ending, so she continued on writing, and the plot just got crazier and crazier and crazier as she added to the book. Certain characters were just very bad at their job, and I really hated that Sloane depended on a male character to save herself. Like, I really wanted her to save herself by herself. Like, I didn't want her to depend on another man to rescue her. But that's just my personal opinion. Again, 3 out of 5 stars. Not the best Colleen Hoover book in my opinion, but I still enjoyed reading it for what it was. So the next book that I read was The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Let me just say that I give this book a 5-star rating. I absolutely loved everything about this book, and I know that I bashed Taylor Jenkins Reid. Well, I didn't bash her. I just said that I wouldn't read any of her books ever. I was wrong. In my defense, the synopsis of her books always seem so boring to me. They don't really seem all that interesting, but I decided to pick up these books because I wanted to see what people were talking about, what the hype was about. And let me tell you, I understand the hype behind The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. This is a historical fiction book. It follows a old Hollywood star named Evelyn Hugo. The book is divided into 7 parts. Each part is named after one of Evelyn Hugo's husbands, and you basically get to see her come up in Hollywood. You basically get to see her meet her husbands for the very first time, date them, marry them, and see how their marriage collapses at the end. And it's a very well written book, very captivating. The rating makes you feel like you're living right there with Evelyn Hugo. It was just such a beautifully written book. Like, I can't say that enough. I love Evelyn Hugo's character. She did a lot of questionable things throughout her career, but she did them to protect herself and to protect the people that she loves. So even though you may not agree with her tactics, I feel like you still have to respect the fact that she did it all out of love. I didn't see the ending coming in this one either. Just again, read this book if you haven't read it. I know that the synopsis again doesn't sound all that entertaining, but it is worth the read. And by the time I finished this book, I was kind of upset that Evelyn Hugo wasn't actually real. Not gonna lie, I was a little confused as I was reading it. I even googled, is Evelyn Hugo real? Because it felt like she was a real person, and I just loved it. So definitely recommend this book, you guys. I did read another Taylor Jenkins Reid book, and that was Daisy Jones and the Six. Similar to The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, this is a book that just did not seem appealing to me at all, but I wanted to know what the hype was about, and this is another 5-star read for me. I feel like I am just obsessed with Taylor Jenkins Reid's writing now. As I was reading this book, which it takes place in the late 1960s, early 1970s, I felt like I was living in that time period with Daisy and the rest of the band. And again, I felt like these were real people, that they actually existed at some point. The characters were all very well written. I loved the banter, I loved the dialogue, everything, the setting, the sceneries, everything about this book was just pure perfection, and I highly recommend for you guys to check out this book. It basically follows Daisy's life, and it follows the band Daisy Jones and the Six, how they started and how eventually they ended. I will say that the ending felt a little underwhelming for me. Like, when I read the ending, I was like, is that really how things happen, or is that really all that's going to happen and now the book is over? Like, I don't know, I just felt underwhelmed with the ending. Maybe that's just my personal opinion. I don't know if other people felt the same way, but I am excited to check out the show on Amazon Prime. I haven't watched it yet, but I want to so bad. I've heard so many good things about that show, and I've read that the fans of this book actually think that the casting for that show was done perfectly. So I'm really excited to check out that show, and I'll definitely give you guys an update on what I think about the show once I watch it. But definitely read this book if you haven't read it yet, because it is really good, and again, 5 stars. My review of this next book might upset some people because it is a very beloved book on Book Talk, but I, for the life of me, cannot understand the hype behind this book, and that is Addicted to You by Krista and Becca Ritchie. This book is the first book in the Addicted to You series. It follows Lauren and Lily, who are childhood best friends, and they are both struggling with addictions. Lauren is addicted to alcohol. Lily is addicted to sex. They are trying to hide their addictions from their family, so for years they have been faking a romantic relationship with one another. They don't want to get help for these addictions. They want to continue doing what they're doing and live the way that they're living. This book is just very toxic. The 2 main characters are hella toxic for one another. They are constantly enabling one another, which I understand why. They feel like the only people that understand them are each other, and no one else will understand their dynamic, so they don't let anyone else in. Eventually the lies catch up to them, and eventually their family and friends start to question their relationship and their behaviors. Towards the end, it does get a little bit better for me. Like, I did DNF this book the first time I tried reading it. I think I DNF'd it in the first 150 page mark. Once I got past like 200 or 250 pages, I was able to tolerate the book a little bit more. A lot of you guys have told me that the first 3 books in the series are kind of hard to get into, but once you read them, the series definitely gets a lot better. So for that reason, I am going to continue reading this series, and hopefully you guys are not steering me in the wrong way. Hopefully I don't buy all these books books and ends up hating them, but we shall see. I ended up giving this book a 2 out of 5 stars. Again, not my favorite read from April, but I'm glad that I finally read it and went back to it after I originally DNF'd it. Next up, we have Things We Hide from the Light by Lucy Score. So this is the second book in the Knock 'Em Out series. It follows Knock's little brother Nash and Lena. Nash was shot in the first book, and in this book he's still dealing with that traumatic event and he's still trying to deal with his PTSD. He's not even trying to deal with it, he's just kind of like ignoring the symptoms and pretending that everything is fine in front of his family, in front of his colleagues, in front of his friends. But it's very clear that he is struggling and that he needs to get outside help, or at least lean on someone else, and to just not hold all of that trauma inside him. And because of that, Nash is kind of a grump in this book, when in the first book he was not a grump at all and he was very nice, very sunshiny, very trusting. In this book he doesn't trust anyone, he doesn't even trust himself. So when Lena comes along, it's the first time he actually feels something after being shot. He hangs on to it for dear life, but then he realizes that Lena is hiding something from him, and once again he starts to question his ability to trust people and his ability to trust his own instinct. This book is definitely a slow burn. It takes forever for something to happen between Lena and Nash. If you're into slow burns, then you're probably going to enjoy this book because it is very slow. I'm not a huge fan of slow burners because look at how thick this book is. I felt like I was reading forever and nothing was happening. I just feel like this book was filled with a lot of fillers that really had nothing to do with the plot, but I just didn't feel connected to it as I felt connected towards the first book, and for that reason I just didn't really enjoy it all that much. I am excited for the third book in the series, which I think comes out later this year, and it actually follows Lucian, and I don't even know all that much about him, but I just love how mysterious he is, and I'm really excited to read about his love story in the third book. Hopefully the third book is a lot better than this one, because this one was just not it for me, and it makes me really sad because normally I do enjoy Lucy Score's writing. But overall, I gave this book a 2 out of 5 stars. If you like slow burns, then I can definitely see you enjoying this one, but if you're not into slow burns, then maybe sit this one out because it's just way too damn slow. Like, why make a thick book be this slow? I just don't understand it. So yeah, 2 out of 5 stars. Not my favorite Lucy Score book. Those are all the books that I read in the month of April. I read some really good books in April, and I read some books that weren't that great, but I'm so happy that I was able to read them because, again, all of these books are super popular on BookTube and Book Talk, so I'm glad that I was able to check them out and form my own opinions. Some of them I definitely understand the hype behind them, others not so much, but I'm really excited for May. I recently bought some really good books that I'm going to be reading in the month of May, so really excited. Definitely subscribe and stay tuned for my May TBR, which should be up later this week or sometime soon. Let me know in the comments below if you had a 5-star read in April, and I really hope you guys enjoyed watching. If you did, don't forget to give this video a big thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. I would love to have you a part of my channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye guys.